What's up, everyone, and welcome to ClearTalk. So, in this video, I'm moving away from politics for a second, and this is going to be more in the religion kind of series. But while I had planned to continue, or rather finish up the Jesus series, I decided I'm gonna wait probably another week or so before I do that, and because I wanted to talk about something else, because it's just something that come up here recently that I come across, and I decided I wanted to talk about it. And it kind of revolves around the idea of people rejecting Jesus. So I guess it's about Jesus, but kind of not. Anyways, people rejecting Jesus and why, and this like very narrow-minded perception of why people would reject Jesus. So I want to talk about that. So thank you very much for joining me. If you are new here, welcome to ClearTalk. I'll get the right one here in a second. To ClearTalk. If you would like to check out more videos from the channel, please do so over there at ClearTalk. And consider subscribing, like, share, all that good stuff. If you want to check out videos from the other channels as well, JMDPLAY, JMD Puzzling, that would be fantastic as well. And consider subscribing to those. Because, subscribing helps out. It's free for you, helps out the channels, helps get the videos in front of people, and all that, helps out me, helps out JMD Nation altogether to grow and, to have a conversation. So, and if you want to do any kind of support, there's links and stuff. Whoops, over here. If you want to do more like continuous or one-time stuff and become a part of JMD Nation, then that would be wonderful. And any support you do give is very much appreciated. So thank you very much. And if you're returning, you are awesome. Okay? You are freaking amazing. Thank you for returning. Keep coming back, returning over and over and over again. That's wonderful. And I will tell you that every time. You are freaking amazing. So thank you. Now, so the reason why I decided I want to talk about this is because, and I've had stuff like this happen over and over and over again, where I see something. This is going to be kind of a two-part thing here. I'm going to talk about two kind of different things, but they're associated. I had someone recently who was close to me. It's close to me. Post something that basically stated that people reject Jesus because of bad experiences with religious people. That's like what many people do. They reject Jesus because of, the idea of rejecting church because of church people or whatever. And reject church, you reject Jesus, you're rejecting the religion, you're rejecting all this kind of stuff. And basically saying that like, Jesus had bad experiences too with religion people. I mean, religious people, after all, they, killed him. And while there's a lot of things that's kind of wrong with that statement, and I want to go ahead and say, for the sake of this person even coming across this video, I am not in any way attacking this person or talking about this specifically because of them. I am talking about this in a general sense of the mentality of many people who think this way. And in trying to bring some nuance to this conversation, from someone who, I do consider myself under the atheist umbrella, not religious, but I have been there. Okay, I've been Christian. I've, for half of my life, over half of my life, and well, half of my life. So it's not, I know this. I know I've been there and know both sides. First off, this kind of misconception of why Jesus was killed, and this argument that it was by his own people because one specific person in the Bible said so, or drove his audience in behind the idea that in a very anti-Semitic way, although that's not really the argument you could probably have for that time, but that the Jews, killed their own king, their own, leader. And I've made this argument about that before. Like, for starters, even if you did think that they killed him, like they pushed the Romans to do so, this doesn't necessarily stand for all Jews of that time. It could have been a very small portion of them who disagreed with a specific, a specific part of Judaism, or it could even be a New Age kind of thing, like a different branch of the belief that didn't believe certain other things or didn't believe the idea behind Jesus and what he was speaking of, trying to push for it. I mean, there's so many. It's not like you're arguing that all Jews, like, to make that argument, you're arguing that all Jews of the time are the reason why and pushed for Jesus to be crucified. And that's just a lazy argument in itself. Like, majorly lazy argument in itself. Secondly, we've made this discussion as well that the Roman Empire, the Roman leadership, did not take, they were not the type to take in consideration or care about a group of people and who they wanted them to crucify. Like, their leadership would not have cared about some Jews wanting to crucify another Jew. Like, that would not even come into place, because the argument is being made in one book of the New Testament that the Romans didn't see a problem with Jesus. But it was all the Jews' fault. The Romans would not have crucified them if it weren't for the Jews pressuring them to do so. That's the argument that's made. It's only made by one person in the Bible. But that is then joined together, like we've talked about all, and everything with the Bible is joined together to create this one massive story when there are individual parts that do not go along with other parts. And it shouldn't be looked at that way. And then it's told and it's preached and it's taught that is the story, and that there's no other version of it, when that's just not true. So that out of the way, the Romans would not have done that. The Romans crucified Jesus because they wanted to crucify Jesus. They looked at him as as somebody who was going against their rule. He was arguing against their rule, discussing, the liberation of the Jews from Roman power, and that an end would be coming. He was an apocalyptic teacher. That's what he taught. It was in the vein of all the apocalyptic teachers of the time. And so he was considered a threat. One of many, but he was considered a threat to the Roman Empire. and their controlling and keep on power. That's the reason why he was crucified. Didn't matter whether or not some Jews didn't like him or not, because in other books of the Bible, the Jews had nothing to do with it, or any set of Jews didn't have anything to do with it. So, this is just a horrible take, or a misled understanding of Jesus's crucifixion, of who was in control of that and who made that decision. Okay. So no, he wasn't killed by religious people, unless you're arguing that the Romans were religious people and therefore that, but they were of a different religion altogether. So now that's not even, apples to apples. All right. We're like, we've disassociated there. Now the idea behind people rejecting Jesus, and the argument would be like towards somebody even like me, that I rejected Jesus because of other religious people, like bad apples, let's say. While there is probably an argument for some that may have decided to walk away from church or walk away from the religion, I would even say probably more so the organization of it than Jesus himself, because of the people in the organization, or some people in the organization, some people in the church. I would probably argue that that's a very small amount. The most people, if you were concentrating solely on the idea of rejecting Jesus or rejecting Christianity, is what they really are meaning here, not Jesus, but rejecting Christianity, is most likely because they actually read the Bible, because they actually went to church and listened to a preacher saying something, but then they read the Bible and found that there was conflict there, or they just straight up read the Bible and saw the conflict in the Bible, multiple conflicts, contradictions, things that morally some people would have very much trouble getting behind, especially in the Old Testament. And it wasn't really a rejection of Jesus. It was a rejection of the Bible. More than likely a rejection altogether of the God represented in the Bible. And why that is, and I would argue that, is because I know, because now, being and running and listening and being a part of a broader umbrella of like atheist people, of people who are in that idea or in, something branched, affiliated to it, I would say that most people actually are okay with Jesus. The man, the person, those who think he actually existed altogether, have no problem with the man and the teachings that, if we are to believe everything that was said to come from his mouth in the Bible, which, there's argument if some are legit, some probably not. But if we are to believe certain ones or whatnot, the majority that I think are probably placed correctly on his lips portray him as a pretty good person, advocating for fairly decent things. Now, Some things, maybe not so much, but mostly he was a pretty good person that spoke and taught to love one another, care about one another for the most part. Like, he was a pretty decent. I can see most people who reject the religion or reject even God most of the time fall in some sort of acceptance of Jesus the man. Because Jesus the man, in some of the degree of things taught, arguably, correctly or not, maybe, who knows, from him, were reasonable, at least to some degree, more so than not. I mean, most would even argue that Jesus would not agree whatsoever with modern day Christianity and now how it is portrayed, how it is taught, how he is portrayed. So while you may be trying to make the argument that people rejected Jesus, there is a very good argument that Jesus would actually reject himself, would reject the Jesus Christ that is portrayed in Christianity. Because that's something else. There's a complete difference. Jesus the man and Jesus the Christ. The more supernatural, miracle working, like divinity that's being placed upon what I would argue was just a man who was trying to teach goodwill for the most part, and to care for one another and whatnot, and to prepare for something that he thought was going to come within his lifetime or shortly after, which would have been the God, his version of God, what he believed was God, the kind of an arguably different God from even Yahweh, a more God of of compassion, would come down with some sort of power and bring the people of the Jewish people and the people of the area out of the control of the Roman Empire. Like, he was a part of that type of idea. A more justice God. Not so much a vengeful God. I would argue he probably considered more of a justice, compassionate God. And like I've made the argument before, his God potentially was not even, like I said, the Yahweh God of the Jews. But it could have been. Nevertheless, the whole Christdom that was placed on Jesus, in my opinion, is wrong. It was something that people later placed on him to deify him, make him bigger than he was, to make him the image of a movement that was the early Christian movement. There were different versions of that as well, and they deified him or portrayed him differently in those different movements. whether we're speaking about more of a Pauline movement or the Johannian movement, which was more so what we're talking about, has completely skewed this type of idea that we were talking about, where the Jews were the ones who crucified him. Jesus is the least likely reason why anyone rejects Christianity or rejects religion, like in the scope of Christianity, the Bible, God. Now, I understand in arguing that people rejecting Jesus, they're kind of putting all that under the same thing. Jesus stands for God. Jesus stands for the Bible. Jesus stands for Christianity. Jesus stands for religion that culminates all that. But what I'm saying is Jesus was a man. He was not God. If we split those up, we split that Jesus was not Christianity. Jesus was Jew. Christianity was created in the name of Jesus, using a man to create a movement of divinity to in the name of trying to like broaden the scope of Judaism to the outer world, to Gentiles, to where more people were brought into the scope. It was a broader stroking type of idea. That worked. But when people reject religion, reject Christianity, oftentimes it's not because of Jesus. It's not because of religious people, even so, a lot of times. Although, yes, it very much can be. But most of the time, most people reject Christianity or reject God because of the Bible, because what has been written about God, what has been written in the Bible, and the atrocities and the acts that he promoted, that he encouraged, Yahweh encouraged in the Old Testament. And while Jesus was supposed to be kind of a bridge and almost an apology for all of that, the Christ was supposed to sort of be a forgiving factor between that type of God-willed power on earth, on the world, so that we could have a better relationship, or that so that those types of things wouldn't need to be done anymore. Nevertheless, Christianity takes on the Bible as a whole, argues, or groups of Christianity argues, and the people who are behind this type of concept argue that the Bible is inherent, like it is inherently like there are infallible, that it is there's no error, inerrant. That's what I meant, inerrant, with no errors. It was purposely and perfectly created and made, all of it, and influenced by God through man. And that's just wrong. It is irrefutably wrong. And then in turn, the other part to this that I want to talk about is the fact of stating and using this as a way of arguing using the argument or using the, I guess in their words, witnessing or using the power of prayer or whatever as a rebuttal or a response to this type of argument I am making here, as Jesus loves you, and that I'm hoping one day that you will realize that and you'll come back to the fold. That one day you would just realize that this is all wrong, that you are all wrong. And in Jesus' name, you will find Jesus' grace. You will no longer reject him. And you will be back into the group. You will be a part. You'll be saved. You'll be everything will be okay. Well, I say that will never happen. And it's because I have taken Jesus out of the equation. Because I don't necessarily have a problem with Jesus, the man. I don't have a problem with the concepts that he tried to teach so much as I have a problem with everything else that surrounds him when it comes to the Bible, when it comes to God, when it comes to the modern movement, even the early church movement, even more so where the orthodoxy that took control and has grew into the modern version that it is, still trying to regress civilization, still trying to control civilization in the name of this man. And that's just speaking solely around Christianity itself, not to mention all my other things that I have taken in about other religions or mythologies or beliefs or opinions of the world or whatever. When you've gotten to the understanding that I have gotten to around this idea, around that point, there is no going back. There is no unlearning it. There is no changing of my opinion on it. Because I see it for what it is. So while I know it makes you feel good to say that you're going to pray for me and that you are hoping the power of prayer and Jesus's, goodness and grace will bring me back, respectfully, I know for you, you don't feel like you're wasting your time, but respectfully, you are. You kind of are. And I know that's hard to understand. It's hard to take in. It's hard to believe because you couldn't fathom. You're so in the bubble that you couldn't fathom somebody being outside of it and being okay with that. But I am. And there are lots of people like me that are. Many, many, many people. And more and more and more people every day. That not necessarily think completely like I do, but they've come to the realization that it's not and I feel like I've gone off topic here a little bit, but I feel like it's not the truth that it claims to be. My point is some people reject Christianity, reject religion, reject going to church, but don't necessarily reject Jesus. May even reject God, but don't necessarily reject Jesus, or at least the concept of the teachings of the man. Or that are believed to have been the possible teachings of the man, let's say. Because if those teachings are correct and are accurate, he would be on a list of a lot of men in history, and probably women too, as a matter of fact, who had more positive opinions towards the people around them or their neighbors and society at large, and advocated as much. And are, would all be idealistic enough to like be memorialized or be remembered for greatness or potential greatness, or moving or promoting for greatness. Doesn't necessarily make any of them more special than the other. But, still worthy of remembrance. Not worship. Not deification. Or used to control people. But to be remembered. So, anyways, thank you very much for joining me. I feel like I may have went a little around on this one, but I hope I was able to keep it somewhat in the same idea. Like I said, This was just speaking in general of this type of thought. The idea of everything that is related to Christianity, religion, God, the Bible, everything being placed on the name of Jesus, and then argued that if there's any rejection of any of that, you're rejecting Jesus. And that's the rejection of that, and is because of whatever, like, these different things that are not actually a rejection of Jesus. Like, there's just so much more nuance to place it into such a small, narrow idea when there is so much more nuance to discussions like this, to the discussion of anyone rejecting anything around religion, around God, or, whatever. Or even if they do reject Jesus, there's much more nuance than just a simple meme or a simple post. So, thank you very much for joining me. And until next time, peace, clear talk, with love. I'm out.